Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to come out politics. So, with fears that AI is going to massively drive up unemployment as it takes jobs which do not get replaced with newer jobs, as usually happens with technological advancements, one commentator spelled out a grim future for advanced economies where GDP will continue to climb, but most people will end up in desperate poverty. But although there is a logical sequence to their supposition, which is always good, I do think it misses out on some key factors. How great a threat AI becomes to various societies, I would argue, has a lot to do with the strength of democracies in the affected countries. But before I get onto that, let me explain the basic premise that inspired this discussion. So I've put a link in the description below to the source video if you want to check it out yourself. It's a very good video, and as I always aim to do, it does set out a very logical sequence for their conclusions very clearly. This is the basic premise. It focuses essentially on clerical jobs which AI could conceivably do. The abridged version is this. Companies replacing staff with AI see greater productivity as the technology can not only do the work better, faster and more accurately, but can work 24/7 and do it all for less money. This forces other companies who value their staff to eventually give in to the pressure and adopt AI because they're losing out to AI-powered competitors. Once it's the norm that these entry-level workers are replaced with AI, then it makes sense for it to move up a stratum and so on. Eventually you get to middle managers being the only real people. And it's like, well, you're not managing people anymore. You're only now doing task allocation. And you know what? AI can do that better, faster, 24/7 and cheaper. Once middle management is all AI, well, there's no real need for senior management either. Basically, AI takes over the entire structure of the company, one stratum at a time, until the only people involved in the company that are humans, are the board of directors and the shareholders. And this isn't just for one company, but for entire sectors where the work can be done by AI. As people lose their jobs to AI, they can't find work elsewhere because it wasn't just one company laying off staff, but the entire industry. Their skills are now useless. This drives up unemployment because it's not like this technological revolution, unlike others, has created new jobs for humans elsewhere. But the video posits that once you have this critical mass of people laid off and unable to find work, they campaign for some redistribution of wealth along the lines of UBI, Universal Basic Income. But the media companies don't report on the calls or protests, and the politicians are funded by mega donations from the very companies getting rich off the AI productivity. The video points out that a country being wealthy does not bring wealth to its people if those people are not needed to generate that wealth. It highlights Venezuela and Nigeria as having huge oil wealth, yet massive levels of poverty amongst their general citizenry, or DRC with huge mineral wealth, but same problems with extreme poverty. The point they make is that wealthy countries only have wealthy citizens if those citizens are necessary to power that wealth. Indeed, this is not a new idea. It's at the core of what Karl Marx was pointing out a long time ago. The video describes a population bereft of bargaining power and so doomed to a life of poverty, that the country's GDP continues to make that country look rich, but the population is poor and there are knock-on effects too. If a huge chunk of the middle class cannot find decent work, they have much less consumer power. So companies who provide goods and services for people do badly. So while the stock market overall looks healthy, it's the tech companies powering it up, while industries catering for actual people suffer, making investments in them less attractive. You can imagine the spiral of decline this leads to, and there's a fear it could happen really quite quickly. However, there are quite a few factors which the video does not introduce, probably just because they don't want to complicate things. But it is absolutely essential, I think, to discuss at least one factor here. So in the video, the presenter cites a number of key assumptions. They're all reasonable in their own way, but I think there are two key assumptions for this sequence of events, which I would say depend on the strength of democracy in affected countries. And how true these assumptions are, or how close to reality they end up being, I think will vary from country to country. For example, Venezuela, Nigeria and DRC are all democracies. They have elections, but those democracies are not strong ones. The people put up with lower living standards than they really should, and their expectations of political leaders is low. But what about countries like the USA, Canada, UK, France, Germany, and so on, where we have higher expectations? Remember, the number one issue in all of these countries is what? Cost of living. That is the public demanding better of the government. Well, let's see here. The first assumption that I think I'm going to pick on is that although there would be big protests to call for UBI or something like it, the mainstream media won't cover it. There'll be a bit of a blackout. Social media companies would block it. But is that how the media would behave? We can probably rely on Space Karen and Zuckerberg platforms to suppress information on these protests, sure, at least in America. But what about other social media and mainstream media platforms? In America, maybe. I'm not confident about the way democracy is going in the USA, if I'm honest. I'm not entirely happy about the situation we find ourselves in the UK, but I have a bit more confidence. But I certainly think that in some advanced economies, the media ecosystem is strong enough that it would report on such protests. But the biggest assumption for me is this idea that the unemployed former workers would have no leverage. This wouldn't be true everywhere. First of all, one possibility is it might increase union membership, especially in countries with stronger union representation. In the UK, for example, we have decent unions and are about to get laws to further strengthen them. Union membership amongst the sort of workers threatened by AI is really depressingly low right now, but that could change very quickly if the threat suddenly becomes obvious. I do think that needs to be taken into account. In terms of the politics, much would depend on what sort of government is in place at the time. In the UK, we have a pro-union government now, which is in the process of boosting those union powers further. They would be sympathetic to the cause. Were we to be stupid enough to let Farage in, we would, of course, be bollocksed. But then comes another safeguard, democracy itself. These workers may or may not have much leverage. That depends on the strength of unions in that country and their membership of unions. But they are still citizens with a vote. They're not just workers, they're voters. The mega corporations may have the money to fund politicians, but it's the people who decide who wins an election. If we argue that in some advanced economies at least, the media ecosystem is strong enough to inform the public about the situation, including protests calling for UBI or some other form of economic rearrangement, and that unions in some countries will be a powerful rallying point for these people, then it seems doubtful to me that the government could simply allow maybe a quarter to a third of the population to suddenly become unemployed and thrown on the scrap heap. Unions certainly won't accept that. We know from history that those who are used to a poor lot in life do often take poor treatment. But the middle classes are all about aspiration. They're not having that. And AI is threatening middle class jobs much more directly. Lower paid manual work is threatened, but indirectly. So whether this dystopian image of the future for advanced economies becomes a credible threat or not is, I would say, not entirely down to the factors mentioned in that video. I would say the democratic health of the affected nation is a huge factor. The stronger the democracy, the more chance that governments have to adapt and carry out some economic re-engineering. And of course, economic re-engineering tends to work better when multiple connected countries do so together, because our economy is effectively a global economy. So the chances of humans still staying on top in this new AI world, which may only be a few years away, could depend on not only your own country having a robust democracy, but other closely allied countries likewise. So the future may not be as bleak as you could think from that video, although there may need to be some growing pains if governments don't get ahead of the game. But do you think we should be demanding that our governments prepare for this eventuality? Or are we just focused on governments putting out the immediate fires, which keep popping up thanks to an already incredibly uneven balance of wealth and power? Let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Click the bell notification icon so you know when new videos are coming out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.